Yep. Tonight, Tim and I are going to take on a subject that a lot of people have been dealing with. And interestingly enough, it was the very first book I ever wrote called Aliens and Fallen Angels, The Sexual Corruption of the Human Race. And tonight we're going to deal with some of the differentiations between evil spirits, demons, and entities, fallen angels, that are able to take on corporeal bodies. In other words, they can take on the body of human beings, they can eat, and they can do other things. And for the people, I can't read all the scripture tonight, but they can go to Genesis 19, and they'll see that the angels that came into Lot's house were so much like men that the men who were the sodomites wanted to have sex with them. Now, a lot of people forget this, that, this is in the Old Testament, and they say, well, angels, are neither given or taken in marriage, but as Jesus said, angels, in heaven, when the Pharisees were asking about marriage, he said, there is no marriage in heaven. And the point is that there is on earth. So the fallen angels came to earth. But fallen angels are different from demons, and they're different from aliens. And I want to, Doug, in order to open up tonight, I want to read a lot of some of the wisest men, people in the Air Force, scientists, others, whose statements concerning UFOs are very telling. I think, I don't know of any of them except maybe Dr. Warner von Braun, who ultimately became a Christian. And on his grave, I believe, is Psalm 19. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the earth shows forth his handiwork. But I want to quote some quotes, and I'm going to turn it over to Tim. We are dealing, this is by Jacques Vallée, and he was an astronomer and a very, very bright man. We are dealing with, concerning the UFO phenomenon, we are dealing with a yet unrecognized level of consciousness, independent of man, but closely linked to the earth. I do not believe anymore that UFOs are simply the spacecraft of some race of extraterrestrial visitors. This notion is too simplistic to explain their appearance, the frequency of their manifestations through recorded history, and the structure of the information exchanged with them during contact. Skeptics who flatly deny the existence of any unexplained phenomenon in the name of rationalism are among the primary contributors to the rejection of science. Science by the public. People are not stupid, and they know very well when they have seen something out of the ordinary. When a so-called expert tells them the object must have been the moon or a mirage, he is really teaching the public that science is impotent or unwilling to pursue the study of the unknown. Now listen to this. The symbolic display, again, Jacques Vallée, the symbolic display seen by the abductees is identical to the type of initiation, ritual, or astral voyage, astral projection that is embedded in the occult traditions of every culture. The structure of abduction stories this is amazing, that the structure of abduction stories is identical to that of occult initiation rituals. The UFO beings of today belong to the same class of manifestation as the occult entities that were described in centuries past. Now remember, this is a scientist. He's talking about very evil spiritual. Listen to this. The medical examination to which abductees are said to be subjected, often accompanied by sadistic sexual manipulation, great, aliens are into SM, is reminiscent of the medieval tales of encounters with demons. It makes no sense in a sophisticated or technical framework. Any intelligent being equipped with scientific marvels like that UFO possess would be in a position to achieve any of these alleged scientific objectives in a shorter time and with fewer risks. I will stress once again that we do not know the source from which UFOs or the alien beings come, whether or not, for example, they originate in the physical universe as modern astrophysics has described it, but they manifest in the physical world and bring about definable consequences in that domain. So in Genesis 19, when the angels go down to see, and remember, the idea was that they were going to see if the destruction, they're going to ensure the destruction, and it was interesting to me that people forget that these angels looked totally like men. They could eat, and they were offered the ability to sleep, but obviously in a house, but they said, we're going to go into the streets all night. They probably wanted to make sure that, everything was in place for the judgment that would come upon Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, again, what's interesting, years ago, Doug, I interviewed Whitley Strieber, and Whitley Strieber was an amazing guy. I really like him a lot. And when he talks about demons and when he talks about what he was subjected to, his rational scientific mind was kind of blown, because in the end of the encounter, he said that it was like a whole different occult, and he even used the word demons. He wanted to scream, yet he couldn't. So tonight what we're going to do is cover the different manifestations of aliens, and we're going to get to the point where I think people will have a whole different understanding of the level and the time of deception, and I'm going on record as saying from the time the Catholic Church, and I'm sorry, this is not an anti-Catholic statement, but started talking about baptizing aliens, the reason why that is not acceptable to God is because Jesus died for humanity that was created by God. Jesus is called the second Adam. So the point being is the first Adam transgressed. Sin came in the human race. The human genome then was corrupted in ways I think that we're going to find out as transhumanism and genetic manipulation continue to accelerate. But we're talking again about a phenomenon that is largely occult-based, and occult just means hidden. And the fact that, Tom Horn was at Mount Graham, and some of those famous astronomers in the world, guys with more degrees than, like I like to say, than thermometers, were there telling them they had to wait for the field to clear because there were so many unidentified flying objects. None of the early space flights could get away from acknowledging them. And Alan Hynek, who was the head of Project Blue Book, talked specifically about being briefed by the Air Force to even go so far as to have Disney make cartoons to ridicule it. In other words, Hynek said in no uncertain terms, this was an orchestrated government cover-up like no other. And he then went on to say that the evidence is beyond beyond any deniability, and it's totally there. And so we have it through the entire spectrum. And I'll get into more of these quotes, but here's the thing that people have got to understand. Jesus' words to us were, "Be ye not deceived." And deception can come in many packages. And it's interesting that even Lilith the night hag, which is mentioned, and by the way, that's what it's talking about in Psalm 91, the terror that comes by night, was a demon that could take on the beautiful human form of a female and literally take on the realm of a succubus, a female demon, and sexually engage men and then devour them. In essence, cannibalize them. So I won't go into the details. There is a strange phenomenon that biologically would allow that to take place. It's not within this time period to talk about it, but as tonight Tim and I are going to talk about our desire to make known to people, if they understand this, they won't get on the spaceship like in that episode from the Twilight Zone to serve man to a giant alien. And I think that's lost on most people. That was one of the most famous Twilight Zone episodes, called To Serve Man. You can go on, do an internet search and pull it up. But I don't know if you remember that, Doug, but that thing was a giant alien. He wasn't a normal size. So, thanks for having Tim and I on tonight. And let me just say one more thing, that Branson now is filled up. We are limited. We can't invent seats. We tried to warn everybody, and so now the only way that they're going to be able to see it is to live stream it, and we're filling up fast. I think people think that was just a make-up story. I had one guy read me the riot act that we should have known that this thing would fill up, and I mean, by the time he got through, I answered him politely, believe it or not, and we can't make seats where there are none. He waited. He continued to write. He said, "I want to be where the power of God is." And I sent him an email saying, "You better check your heart, pal." I didn't say pal. I said mister or something. But anyway, Branson is sold out. We're looking for a powerful move of God there. And some of the most, I would say this, cutting-edge, reality-based, biblically accurate, and important information for people to be able to understand the gospel, understand the nature of spiritual war, and understand how the future is now. And the future is here. Go ahead, Tim.
Well, thank you for having me on, gentlemen. There's a lot of misconceptions floating around concerning the UFO question, concerning aliens, especially among Christian communities. This is an extremely serious topic. The question of UFOs, the question of aliens, as it spills over into the topics of transhumanism, post-humanism, it's deadly serious. This is not a trivial topic. This is very important information, and it's very important to make sure that we are processing it properly, that we're not over spiritualizing the situation, and that we're not falling into the space brothers are our friends lie either. So I like to come down on this topic in the most rational position possible. And for me, this began, I was studying UFOs and aliens for a while, some years ago. And I've said this on your show before, Doug, but I'll say it again for those who haven't heard, because I'm not just somebody who's studied UFOs and who's just sort of has a hobby of looking into this kind of stuff. I was very intensely involved in studying UFOs for a while and really trying to figure out what exactly is going on here with the abductions and the whole scenario, because really this thing really began to get a lot of traction. It came into the public purview sometime in the 80s, probably the early 80s, and then it ramped up into the 90s, and it's been going strong ever since. In fact, as I've said, I think last time I was on your show, Doug, I said that that you can pull up Fox News, CNN, you can pull up MSNBC, you can pull up the major newspaper websites on any given day, and you're going to find a story either concerning Mars, concerning the moon, or concerning UFOs. There's going to be some kind of a story alien related every single day. And I know because I do it. I check every day, and I find more often than not, there's some kind of a story that is revitalizing this topic in the minds of the consumers of news. And as I've said before, I believe that this is a process of gradual and slow revealing, a process of revelation, a process of disclosure that is actually happening. It's already underway, but it's not a sudden thing. It's not the president gets up to the microphone and announces that alien life is real or what have you, UFOs are real. It's just being slowly integrated into our subconscious until we assimilate it, just like they're doing with transhumanism, just like they're doing with the transgender stuff. It's a very slow, gradual process, and we subconsciously just assimilate it into our thought process, and it's not shocking anymore. We take it for granted, and by doing that, they can control the way that we think about these things because they're working on a subconscious level, so we need to be aware of that. But while I was in the midst of studying the UFO topic every single day, and really, as I said before, really trying to get to the bottom of it, I was actually involved with my brother-in-law, trying to work out the mechanics of how UFOs fly based on other people's research. And in the midst of this, right in the midst of this period of my life, my brother-in-law and myself, we decided to drive over to a store. I believe it was GNC or something, supplement store, because we work out together and we wanted to go buy some supplements. So we were driving, we were on our way to the neighborhood in which I grew up, which I find interesting. I grew up in Brook Park, Ohio, and I was living in Cleveland at the time. I no longer live there, but that's where I was at the time. And we were driving into an area that was very familiar to me. I grew up in this area, and I spent a lot of time riding my bike around this area. And as we're driving up to this intersection, there's a strip mall. It's a strip mall with a large parking lot in front of it. And it was very cold, windy, very, very windy night, very cold. And we're pulling up to the intersection. And on the other side of the intersection is this shopping complex, this strip mall. And my brother-in-law and I noticed that above the shopping complex, there was this vehicle hovering. And it couldn't have been more than 30 feet above the building on the end of this complex. And we looked at it and we instantly thought that it was a Chinook helicopter that the National Guard was doing some kind of a drill. That's the first thing that came into our mind. And in fact, I think we even said, look at that Chinook or whatever, because it was the size of a large helicopter. It was definitely larger than a regular size helicopter. This was a Chinook style, a cargo carrier style helicopter size. And so we're looking at this thing, and my brother-in-law had the sense to roll his window down, because obviously if there's a big helicopter hovering only 100 yards or so from your vehicle, you should be able to hear it and feel the impact of the wind. And the first thing we realized was that there was no sound whatsoever coming from this craft. And so I pulled through the intersection. I pulled into the driveway. It's a very large driveway. It was relatively empty. It was probably around 8 or 9 o'clock at night. Relatively empty, extremely windy. I pull in and I just throw my car into park, because this craft moved directly over my vehicle and began to descend right over top of myself and my brother-in-law. And keep in mind, this is right in the midst of the time that I was studying this stuff really heavily, really engaged in the UFO question, the alien question. And so here this thing is now descending right over me. It's descending right on top of my car, and we're looking up through the windshield. Our jaws are dropped. We're speechless watching this thing descend over us. It had triangular lights. It was the size of a large helicopter or small aircraft, commercial aircraft, and it had some other color lights, but I remember distinctly these triangular lights, and it descended probably about, I would say, 30 to 50 feet above my car. Our windows were rolled down. There was not a sound. There was no propulsionary system to speak of, no propellers. There was no exhaust. I've seen those Harrier jets take off in different settings, and they're strong enough to blow cars out of the way. There was nothing like that whatsoever. And again, this was a windy night. This craft was not moving at all in terms of being blown by the wind. It did not have fixed wings. It was not a saucer. It resembled, and I always say this, it resembled something more akin to the vehicles that are in the Batman Begins movie or the new Batman series. That kind of angular grayish green body armor is what it had. I had the distinct sense that it was military, but it wasn't our technology. That's the distinct sense that I had. This is military, but it's not our technology. I don't know why I had that sense, but that's what I felt. So I witnessed this thing, and it hovered over us for a while. And no, we don't have any missing time, and no, we were not in some kind of an abduction scenario. But we were sitting there with our jaws dropped, watching this thing descend over us about 50, 30 feet, somewhere in there. And we were able to see it in great detail. And after a while, after about 20 seconds or so of watching this thing, I told my brother-in-law, his name's Tony, I said, Tony, your phone. He had a smartphone. I didn't at the time. And he began to reach for his phone, scramble for his phone, and was trying to get the video app open on his phone so that we could record this thing. We would have got probably the best UFO footage that was ever put online, the real UFO footage, if he would have got this thing out of his pocket in time. By the time he got it out of his pocket and lifted it up, this craft shot up into the air and began to just drift over towards the horizon. So the reason why I say that is because, again, I was in the midst of studying this. I'm approaching all of this, of course, from a biblical worldview. Most of you know I am a believer in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so I'm not involved in the New Age or anything like that. And here I am put in a position as I'm studying it to actually see it with my eyes very close to my car with a witness sitting next to me. So no, I wasn't dreaming. I've never smoked pot in my life. I've never even been drunk. And I'm only saying that to show you that I was in a proper state of mind. And I witnessed this thing in real time. And I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, for those of you who might still have doubts concerning UFOs, this technology exists. And furthermore, our military is in possession of it to a degree. And there is no question in my mind that that technology that I saw was not our technology. It might have been incorporated into a military black project, and we might now have craft that are using that technology, but it did not come from us. It came from something else, from some other source. And it was as advanced as everything you've ever heard or everything you've ever read. It's as advanced as the kind of stuff that Steve Quayle has been talking about for many years. And so I am here to verify that it is absolutely true. I'm not a second-hand witness. I am a first-hand witness. I didn't see a blink in the sky or some saucer floating distantly on the horizon. This sucker was descending right over top of me. So, and I said that just to, for those of you who may still have doubts concerning the whole UFO question, you should not doubt. This technology is real, and we are now in possession of it. And the real question is, and we can get into this later if you want, Steve. The real question is, what kind of Faustian bargains did we have to make in order to get that technology? And that's a bit of a rabbit hole, but it's part of the problem, because we're heading rapidly into the genetic age. I always say this: we're heading into the hybrid age. And there's no denying it, and there's no stopping it. Humanity is running out of time, genetically speaking. I talked about that last time I was on your program, Doug. And that is why we're seeing a surgence, not a resurgence, of, actually, I guess we can say a resurgence if we think about the antediluvian age. We're seeing a resurgence of this of the hybrid paradigm, and furthermore, something called transhumanism, which most of you are probably quite familiar with at this point. Human beings are soon to radically redefine what it means to be human. And the technology is now in place to do that. And the reason why I'm right off the bat here linking this UFO phenomenon to transhumanism is because they are intrinsically connected. These things are intrinsically connected. By the way, the UFO phenomenon has been going on for a very long time. For anybody that's done any in-depth study on the UFO question into ufology, will discover this very quickly. I mean, there's reports of flying ships and flying saucers that go back way back into the 1800s to 1700s. So even the time of Columbus and beyond. So this isn't something new that's happening, as Steve was quoting Jacques Vallée there in the beginning. But what we do need to understand is that we have seen an acceleration of this activity in the last century, and there's no question about that. And when I say the last century, what I mean is from the beginning of the 20th century until today, there has been an increase in UFO activity in the earth, alien abductions, and all kinds of high strangeness happening all over the planet. Now, there's something else that had an acceleration during this period of time. There's something else that was advancing, that was progressing concurrently with this acceleration of the UFO phenomenon, and that is the occult. The occult was also burgeoning at the same time. And this is really it's an occult part of American history. It's a very little known fact of American history, and it's not just of American history. It's really a phenomenon of Western society that's known, but it's little known. Historians know this information, but by and large, the public is not aware of how popularized the occult became in the early 20th century. And that's when you get in that area a little bit before the dawn of the 20th century, and then entering into the beginning of the 20th century. That's when you have the most prolific occult personalities, such as Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, Nicholas Roerich. You have Aleister Crowley. These are the kind of characters that are coming onto the scene. And shortly thereafter, you have the occult political party of the Nazis, the Third Reich. The Nazi Party was an occult party. It was a religious party. It was not purely political. It was an amalgamation of the occult and of political ideals. And a lot of the undergirding, the occult undergirding, a lot of the philosophical undergirding that went into the Third Reich, into the formulation of the Nazi Party, came directly from the secret doctrine, came directly from the famous occultists, the German occultists and the Russian occultists that were making their rounds around the earth at that time. And they were teaching this esoteric knowledge. And they were, in my opinion, these people were true occult initiates. These were not fakers. These were not posers like a lot of the occult, what we know of the occult today. We think of palm readers, and we think of tarot card readers, and we think of the frauds that have been exposed, especially in the United States. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people who are who have recovered to a degree, and who are keeping and practicing the illicit knowledge of the watchers from the world before the flood of Noah. So this is beginning to surge in the early 20th century, and the occult is surging, not just in the United States, all over the Western world. And lo and behold, what begins to surge along with it? The UFO phenomenon. Now, having said that, let me say this. The UFO phenomenon, UFOs and aliens, this is not a primarily spiritual phenomenon. It is not. The craft that I saw hovering above my head was not ethereal. It was physical. It was nuts and bolts technology. The entities that are operating these craft, I believe, are corporeal. These are flesh and blood creatures. They are demonic in nature, but they are corporeal. And there are many reasons why I believe that. And I often cite the testimony of Phil Schneider, who Steve had the privilege of talking to before he was killed. I mean, they tried to kill him many times before they ultimately achieved their goal in silencing him by killing him. Phil, as many of you know, was on a circuit talking about the exposing the deep underground military bases that were being constructed beneath our feet in complete secrecy, and the alien entities that we were encountering as we were building these things. And Phil testifies of the incident, and he had the physical wounds to prove that this happened to him, and other artifacts that he used to travel around with. He had an encounter with one of these entities beneath the ground, under the ground, in a very deep chamber that they were blowing out. I believe they were building an addition onto the Dulce base, and of course, many of you know the story. Phil Schneider went down. He was lowered down in a basket with a Green Beret, and encountered these entities under the ground. And Phil Schneider was obviously shocked to find these entities down there. These group of what might be described as tall grays were down there, and they were very grotesque, and it was a very disgusting sort of environment that opened up beneath this basket that Phil and the Green Beret were being lowered down into this cavern in. And Phil Schneider pulled out his pistol and shot a few of these things dead with a pistol before one of them waved its hand in front of its chest, and some sort of a plasma or some sort of a electric discharge hit Phil, burned two of his fingers off, burned his toes, some of his toes off, and gave him a very aggressive form of cancer. And so Phil Schneider bore in his body the testimony that these beings are in fact very corporeal. But we don't have to rely just on Phil Schneider's testimony. I mean, all we have to do is think back to the offspring of the Watchers, the giants, and the other monsters that were created through the illicit miscegenation of the Watchers in the world before the flood of Noah. These creatures were corporeal. Yes, they were part. They were part fallen angel, and they were part human or part donkey or whatever other creature that these Watchers were breeding with. But they were corporeal. The Goliath was certainly made of flesh and blood. David chopped his head off and killed him with a stone and chopped his head off. So to simply relegate UFOs and the UFO phenomenon and the alien question to the ethereal, to the supernatural, I think is a big mistake. And there's a lot of people out there who are attempting to do this for some reason. And I don't know if they're attempting to do this because it frightens them, or because they don't know how to square the circle, as it is, in terms of, as it were, I mean, in terms of this phenomena fitting in to the biblical narrative. But I believe it absolutely does. And I think we need to remember and we need to take into account some of the advances in physics that we now know about, such as, especially as it relates to hyperdimensions, which we know without a shadow of a doubt now exists, and which we know now exist, rather, and quantum physics. And when you get down to, and I'm not going to go into a whole diatribe here about quantum physics, but when you get down to the quantum level in physics, when you go to the subatomic level of the atom and you get into the quantum realm, the usual laws, the Newtonian physics that we are aware of, the law of gravity and so forth, seem to be overridden by a bizarre, almost supernatural kind of physics that we refer to as quantum mechanics. And so there is a point at which the corporeal, the physical, and the spirit, and what we consider to be the spiritual, the supernatural, come together in the fabric of time and space. And so I think we even need to reconsider the way that we think about the supernatural. I like to think about it as the hypernatural. We are living in the totality of creation. We are living in a creation of multiple dimensions, but we can only perceive three of them. And so if that is the case, and I believe that science has proven that that is the case, then it becomes easier to understand how entities and how craft can be moving around in ways that are foreign to us because of the fall, because of, I believe Adam was able to perceive the totality of creation, but because of sin, a sin darkened his mind, and of course, death came through sin. So we have lost our ability to perceive the totality of created order, and these entities are still functioning. They're functioning, they're using laws of physics that we have simply not yet perceived. So we are dealing with a situation that is very real, that is corporeal, that is tangible, and I believe very dangerous at this point, because as I alluded to before, the governments of the world, especially the United States, I believe Russia, and some of the other first world nations have made Faustian bargains with these non-human entities. And this is certainly in play when we talk about prophecy concerning the end times, and when we talk about geopolitics, even the underlying situation that is driving much of the geopolitics and much of the other affairs that are occurring on the earth in our day and age. So it's important for us to be aware of all of this. It's important for us to approach these topics as rationally, as pragmatically, and as maturely as possible, and not just sweep them under the rug as some nebulous, unexplainable spiritual phenomenon and just label everything either Nephilim or demons or something else, because this is very complex, and we're dealing with physics, and we're dealing with nuts and bolts technology, and we're dealing with corporeal beings.
And I think this is a good point to bring in. It's interesting that the UFO and the inhabitants, and I'm talking of corporeal. Now, the Nazis did two things. The Nazis had seances, they had spiritism, mysticism. Obviously, they had the Anunnaki that went throughout the world looking for religious relics that they thought had supernatural power. But they also were contacted by UFOs and by the inhabitants of UFOs. Now, listen to this, and I don't think people know who, and they will learn after tonight, or those who have read my book. But Herman Oberth, O-B-E-R-T-H, was one of the smartest rocket scientists in the world who came to the United States along with Werner von Braun. And listen, this is a quote of his. Dr. Herman Oberth, who pioneered rocket design for the German Reich during World War II and later advanced rocket technologies for the American manned space launches, cryptically stated, "We Germans," that's what he said, "cannot take the credit for our record advancements in certain scientific fields alone. We have been helped." When asked by whom, he replied, "The people of other worlds." Now, everybody knows that Michio Kaku is probably one of the smartest theoretical physicists in the world. And here's what he said. In my mind, there is no question that they're out there. My career is well established. My textbook are required reading in all the major capitals on planet Earth. If you want to become a physicist to learn about the unified field theory, you read my books. Therefore, I'm in a position to say, yes, most likely they're out there, perhaps even visited, perhaps on our moon. Now, obviously, he's cued in, he's clued in, and a lot of people have been debunking the moon and everything that's gone on the moon. But you ask yourself, why haven't we been back there? Oh, it's just got a bunch of moon dust. Now you hear about mining the moon. There are actually companies being formed that are going to not only mine the moon, but asteroids and Mars. As Tim stated, and I stated this, after Antarctica became headline news around the world, which incidentally coincided with the release of my book, Empire Beneath the Ice, How the Nazis Won World War II, what I'm saying is this, is that there are time, if you will, spans or specific points in time where God releases revelation that's been hidden. And you're seeing that even in the political realm as the trees of wickedness are being what would I say, known by the fruit they bear. If you've never seen the complete scam and sham of Republicans and Democrats, you're seeing it now. But interestingly enough, the deception is the key in understanding all this stuff. It's important, I think, for people to get this through their head, that we are in a time like no other time in history. And listen to this. Dr. Walter Rydell, and he was the chief designer and research director at the German Rocket Center in Peenemünde. And if I'm pronounce that wrong, I apologize to my German listening audience. Maybe it's Peenemünde, I don't know. But what most people don't understand, Rydell, and I deal with this in my book, was ahead of all the secret projects. And he knew what was going on. And all the Hanuvu series of the bell, the shape, the different, even the cigar-shaped craft that people still see today were of German design. And here's what he said. He said this, and this is again, I am completely convinced, I'm repeating this, that UFOs have an outer-world basis. Then he said, and he's considered, like I said, there are three people considered, if you will, the triumvirate of modern rocketry. You've got Goddard in the U.S., but you've got Dr. Hermann Oberth, the German, and you've got, Wernher von Braun. It is my thesis that flying saucers are real and that they are spaceships from another solar system. There is no doubt in my mind that these objects are interplanetary craft or of some sort. I and my colleagues are confident that they do not originate in our solar system. Now, we've been on record, both Tim and I have been on record, that as we find the evidence or more archaeological ancient history of stargates and of the phenomenon associated with stargates, you can't even get away from acknowledging the drawings, if you will, of whether they're ancient astronauts. Now, here's where we differ. We are not of the ancient astronaut theory that they created us. I am of the opinion, and I'll be presenting this at Branson, I'll be presenting a 15-minute video that's been produced that shows the whole realm of God's judgment on the planet Rahab. Mars had an elliptical orbit at times that was out of the order that you see of orbital physics today. So if the ancients could detail in so much clarity as far as 700 years before Jesus, then I'm going to start using BBOJ, before the birth of Jesus, and I'm going to start using AROJ, after the resurrection of Jesus, not before Common Era, etc. You know, the idea is this, that we have so much evidence in history, ancient history, of the very things that Tim is talking about. Now listen, people know the difference when something's spiritual versus something's physical. Those of you familiar with Gallatin Valley, Bozeman, if you go out at Four Corners, which is basically the intersection of different highways, and head up US 91 towards Big Sky and then on to West Yellowstone. My wife and I were coming down about 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago now, at the Squaw Creek turnoff. The Squaw Creek turnoff is kind of a stone bridge that goes over to a place called Squaw Creek. There's a Forest Service cabin. And we looked up to the right as we were driving down the canyon, headed north towards Bozeman, and there was a giant column of light that had to be 3 miles wide. It was almost as coherent as a laser beam, but it was something that you'd only see in a movie, special effects. And it was absolutely making no noise. So I said to my lovely wife, let's cross the bridge and go look at it. To which she said, are you nuts? And I basically yielded to probably her wisdom. But so many times, Doug, I've been in the night vision business, and I used to have a photo store, sold really high-powered telescopes. I mean, high-dollar ones, beyond 14-inch Celestrons. For those of you who are 14-inch meets, the point is that so many phenomena are visible with night vision in the night skies, seeing things crossing the horizon that are not satellites, that go contrary, that zigzag, and they usually fly in formations of 3. So now let me tell you a story that happened during the radio career, and a lot of people may remember this. I was about to bring on, and I won't name him, a very well-placed special operations general who basically has got magic and cosmic clearance, and he's the guy that decides who gets it. There's 2 factions going on in Majestic. There's the evil faction and then the magic faction, which is good, named after the Magi, not magic as in ritual magic or anything like that. The idea simply is that they have so much advance that unless you understand Bud Rich's statement, Bud Rich, Ben Rich, I think his name they called him Bud sometimes, but his name is Ben Rich. He said this. Now, he was the second director of Lockheed Skunk Works, which makes all the secret stuff and reverse engineers everything. We now have technology to take E.T. home. Well, why would you have to take him home unless he was stranded, unless he was landed and stranded here? And he said there are 2 types of UFOs, the ones we build and the ones they build. We already have the means to travel among the stars, but these technologies are locked up in black projects and would take an act of God to ever get them out to benefit humanity. And then he goes on to say, when asked how do these UFO propulsion systems work, he said, let me ask you, how does ESP work? The questioner responded, all points in time and space are connected. Rich then said, that's how it works. So back to the general. I don't know, Doug, if you remember, I think you and I were making friends about the time that relationship was ending. But I can tell you this, Hawk was very much involved in this. There were people that were eyewitnesses. Diana, you remember this if you're listening. There were others who were basically given get off the planet patches, and you may have a really hard time to believe that. But anyway, the technology that they possess is so far in the future that the statement was as far back in time as you can imagine. That's how far in the future we already are. So the Saturn space program, the space shuttle, all the stuff you see as the visible representation of the National Aeronautics Space Administration, or as some people call it more correctly, never a straight answer. The idea simply is this: that was for public consumption. When you want to figure out where all the trillions and trillions of dollars have gone, they've gone into black projects. Those who have been very vociferous about Stargates, I know 2 people that have been through them. Actually, more than that, but I know 2 that I can call up now. The other ones I can't talk to anymore. The point being is that it's so hard for the humans who get on airplanes to fly here to there, even jet fighter pilots who can, travel at sometimes, let's say, 2,000 miles per hour, or the secret black stuff that uses electrogravitics and can jump space. So when you hear somebody that's in charge of the most sophisticated technology that we know to possess, and they're talking about there's two types of technologies, reiterating Herman Ober and one of the three most important people in modern rocketry, when you go in and understand that the Vimanas of ancient Indian legends and also historic narratives really existed, and you're talking about nuclear war, actual nuclear war on planet Earth, even as the vitrified glass of the different above-ground nuclear tests have, it's going to be pretty mind-blowing to people as God reveals the true history of the world. Because now what you're seeing in this country, all truth is parallel. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the earth shows forth his handiwork. That's what the psalmist said. But also, the hand of God is revealing to the world, especially to Americans, the duplicity that they have allowed to exist in their news media and also their entertainment business. Somebody said, describe Martian Chronicles, and I said, look at Hollywood. For the record, I have a motion picture degree and a still photography degree, just in case people wonder. I had one guy demand to know where I went to college, and, the point being, I went to MSU Film School, and the requirement for us was to pick a field of movies that were our favorite. Obviously, I took science fiction. Well, as you start to even look up, and there's some that are left off, all the series, both the television and the movies, Invaders from Mars, The Angry Red Planet, all of the different Japanese movies that had Mars and moon bases, and the people talking about this interstellar war. And I think most of the lists you see, the Mysterians, I don't know how many of you like that stuff. I used to stay up almost all night and watch, Godzilla, Mothra, and the Mysterians. It sounds like three bands, doesn't it? But the point is that the theme has always been there. The first movie about Martians landing in, I think it was 1957, landing in a young man's backyard, and his parents had implants. How did they know about brain implants in 1957? And what's astonishing is that so many of the stelae, so many of the petroglyphs, geoglyphs, all of even the paintings, the rock paintings, the rock art, when you look deeper, they're constellations, and they could not have had the knowledge as looking heavenward, but whoever was in the heavens had to come down and tell them about the movement of the stars. Every single pyramid, every single sacred, mysterious, unusual site, all lined up with the heavens. And as we talk in our movie, The Holocaust of Giants, we talk about the events that are going on to cover up the true history. Here's the reason why this stuff is important. And Doug, you'll get emails, I'll get emails. Let me make it clear to everybody. Because that which professes Christianity has tried to hide away, explain away, or not deal with the anomalies that are out there that people want serious answers to, basically the church abdicated the truth. And for the record, every church father that is noted for some of them being burned at the stake because they wouldn't deny Jesus believed in the fallen entities. They believed in fallen angels. They believed in fallen angels having sex with earth women. And the sons of Seth is absolutely a very, I can't say that word, another word that comes before poor, attempt to cover up biblical truth. Because, again, the ramifications are too overwhelming. Now, let's take the realm of sex, okay? And I said this on your show, I think, a couple weeks ago. I woke up one morning, and the giant S and the EX showed up, along with the statement, Satan's execution of the human race. Now, I started thinking about that, and as one of the guys that was first on the block of, maybe Blog Talk or Block Talk Radio, BLOCK Talk Radio, the we would come to a place where artificial intelligence, where literally we would have sex bots. Believe me, that didn't go over well, Doug, 24 years ago. It was so beyond people's grasp. And then you get Dimitri Duduman being told by the angels. I know there are people that say he doesn't know. They deny prophecy. I get an email from Arnold Henry. Anybody in police vocabulary will understand that. Why do you believe all these prophets? Well, because some of them been right. And, boy, this guy would have a real hard time with the fact that, the prophetic nature of Matthew 24, Luke 21, and Mark, and then all of the book of Daniel, the time of the end where knowledge would increase, they testify against the ignorant denial of prophetic. And in the book of Daniel, it talks about an alien God. Tom Horn goes into great explanation on that, and he's done it on your show. So what we're trying to do tonight is get everyone to understand that they're not just dealing with basically a Ouija board spirit. I can tell you this, in doing the research for my book, Empire Beneath the Ice, literal entities were ectoplasmic birth out of a woman who was a psychic, and the ectoplasmic entities that were birthed just in the same place normal babies come from was giving advanced physics, advanced knowledge to the occultists who were conjuring this thing up and bringing it forth. I find it interesting that because God originally gave man dominion over the earth and man forfeited that dominion, now Satan and those who serve him were willing to take the dominion, and the Christians go, what's dominion? I think they mix it up with a pizza. No, that's Domino's. Dominion, okay? Or they come up with some dominion theory, and they try and take their position, quote, as Christians, given back that control of the earth, yet they don't do it in the power of the Holy Ghost. And they don't do it as Jesus said it would be done. He said, my kingdom is not of this world. But, in this world ye shall have tribulation. So modern-day Christianity, actually starting with the Darbyites and the Irvingites and the McDonald sisters, comes up with you get out of here before it gets bad. And now I think, and you may know better than I do, Tim, but aren't there people saying that September 21st to 23rd, that's when the rapture happens and all that?
Steve.
I tell people there's only one difference between rapture and rupture, and that's the letter U. And I'm not being facetious. I believe, and I'm on record as saying this, that I don't care how many of you get upset. I would challenge every one of you to try and put into perspective, number one, that you're still here. Number two, we're talking about North Korea, nuclear, war, Russia, China, everybody ganging up on the United States. Okay, well, I'm not trying to be cute. What I'm trying to share is this, that to rupture means to break. It means to literally cause to come apart. And what I'm worried about is as all these incidents take place in the world, whether they're terrorist incidents, whether they're aerial phenomenon, whether it's the eclipse, whether it's planetary alignment, stargates opening, creatures, all this stuff, we don't have to, as Christians, fear these days. We are to overcome these days. And so what I'm saying is this, if God declares that once more will he shake the heavens and the earth, then I think it's important that people understand that sometimes when God shakes our theology or our attempt to stay non-involved in reality, there are no spectators in the kingdom of God, only active participants. Whether you want to and you joy in the fact that being wise is winning souls, not criticizing those who do. But the point is that we've got so many different voices out there, and even the people now that were the biggest proponents, I'm going to turn it right over to you, Tim, of, we get out of here before things get bad or really bad, yet what is the definition of really bad? Well, I'll tell you this, that the country, and Doug, you remember when I used to say this and people would give you emails or call you or say stuff, I said, we're going into a civil war. I remember saying that on Art Bell when he was still the host of Coast to Coast, and he said, well, I hope not. I reiterated when George took over, and he had a hard time embracing that. And George is a smart guy, and Art is a very smart guy. But again, again, the idea is if it doesn't happen in 5 years, then, you're a liar, you're a fraud, you're a doomsday, you're a fear porner guy. But what we're talking about now is that which I believe Jesus made very clear when he said, be ye not deceived. And so with that, I'll turn it over to you, Tim, because, again, we're trying to share with people tonight. And by the way, those of you who are going to Branson are going to be live streaming. Please go on our website, True Legends, plural, theseries.com, because we're going to be taking from where we left off in the Holocaust of Giants and the Unholy Sea previous to that, and we're going to take you up to the most, I would say, this compelling research and information that we've ever been given or that we've ever given out. And you'll have a chance to hear Tim interpret before Tim speaks. Man, Tim, you're going to do a lot of talking. Anselm P. Rambla, the most interesting man in the world, and both Tim and I now are in agreement on that, talk about his extensive findings in Peru and the largest stargate in the world, at least on this planet. So go ahead, Tim. Your thoughts as we're entering into this time of, the revelation of flying saucers, in essence, the Matthew 24 period, the thoughts you have currently as you read, you're a voracious reader, you obviously are a voracious researcher, and you'll eat anything in the world as long as, I guess, it isn't dead on the road. Tim once told me he eats anything, and when he ran through the litany of what he ate, it shocked me, and I thought, man, that guy is literally Tim of the jungle. Go ahead, Tim.
I eat everything except for people. So that's where I draw the line.
Okay. Thank you for that.
It's also, if people are wanting to live stream the conference, it's gen6conferences.com. I don't think I have a link up on TrueLegendsTheSeries.com, so you can go directly to gen6conferences.com to sign up for the live streaming. And, I've been working on my presentation that I'm going to be delivering at the conference. And yes, I have to translate Anselm P. Rambla right before my presentation, so hopefully I'm not out of gas before I get on the stage to do my presentation. But Anselm is a wild guy. I mean, his research is phenomenal, and I think everybody who comes into contact with Anselm, let's just put it this way, is impressed with that man. And I think you would agree, Steve, that everybody who comes into contact with him is just, their minds are blown, because this is the guy, he's the real deal in terms of an explorer. And so anyways, but at the conference, I know that there's some things that I've been preparing that I want to say that have they've been sort of disparate thoughts floating around in my head that are suddenly coming together in a coherent way. And so that excites me, because I feel like there's a purpose, there's a divine purpose for the information that's coming forth at this conference. And I'm not saying that to hype the conference, it's just a fact. So one of the things that I'm going to be talking about is the resurgence of the Atlantean Empire. And it has to do exactly with what we've been talking about tonight. And many people are aware that there's a very strange scenario that we discover concerning a final world empire that's going to emerge on the earth at the end of the age, that's detailed for us in the second chapter of Daniel. This is the chapter in which Daniel is interpreting a dream that Nebuchadnezzar had concerning a statue he saw. He saw a statue in his dream, and the statue was comprised of various kinds of metals. And these metals were representative of pre-flood empires, the sequence of empires that had arisen in the earth since the flood of Noah. And it gives us insight, it gives us a preview of the final empire that will arise on the earth. And many of you are familiar with this topic. Some people have been talking about this for a while. But there's some things in here that I think slip past people when they look at this situation. First of all, the head of the statue was made of gold. And we're told what kingdom that was. That was the kingdom of Babylon. This is Daniel's interpretation of the statue to Nebuchadnezzar. The chest and arms of the statue were made of silver. This is the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians. The midsection of the statue was made of bronze. The midsection and the thighs were made of bronze, and of course these were the only empire that had manifested itself at the time that Daniel was interpreting this dream was the King Nebuchadnezzar's empire, the Babylonian Empire. So the midsection of the statue was bronze. This represented the kingdom, the empire of Greece. The legs are interesting. The legs were made of iron, and this represented the kingdom, the empire of Rome. And it's very representative of the empire of Rome because, as many of you know, the empire of Rome split in two, represented by the two legs in the statue. There was the Western Empire and there was the Eastern Empire. It split in two after Constantine. And then there's a final world empire. So we're told that between the Roman Empire and this final world empire, there's not really going to be another world empire, at least in consideration in this statue. So the last empire that's registered in this statue, in the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, is the Roman Empire, the Western and the Eastern manifestation of the Roman Empire. Well, many people don't realize that in theory, the Roman Empire has never really ceased to exist. The other empires were conquered, overthrown, and annihilated. The Roman Empire was never really conquered. It just sort of dissolved into something else. It morphed into something else. It went from being a political power to a religious power. The Western side of the Roman Empire became, the political power was transformed because remember that the Pope, that the Caesar of Rome was called the Pontifex Maximus. That was the title of the political ruler of Rome, who was also the spiritual ruler of the Roman Empire. That title was conferred, was bequeathed to the Pope of Rome. And so it was a very subtle transfer of power from the Empire of Rome, the political empire of Rome, to the religious Roman Empire, which we know today as the Roman Catholic Church, the Western end. And then the Eastern side became the Orthodox Church, not as powerful as the Western, as its Western counterpart, but nonetheless the continuation of the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, which was the Roman Empire, the Eastern version of the Roman Empire. And so we have had, since the days of the political Roman Empire, we have had a continuation of Rome and a religious manifestation in Western Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy, both of which, again, are a continuation of Rome. And the reason why that's important, and this I think slips by people, even people who have studied Daniel 2 in great depth, is that the final empire on earth is a continuation of that iron, of that final empire. I mean, of the previous empire, I should say, because the final empire is the feet of the statue represented by a mixture of iron and clay. Well, the iron is the continuation of the previous empire, but in our time, that continuation is the religious empire, the Western and Eastern Catholicism, the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodoxy. But there's this new element, this clay that's mixed into the equation. And we're told what the clay is. And we're not told exactly what the clay is, but we're given a hint as to what the clay is, because we're told that, Daniel says, as you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they will not adhere or cleave to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. So here we have they being inserted into this situation, into this statue, into this final empire, the feet of this final empire. There's this mysterious they who are suddenly in the equation. Now, we know that the they are not a natural part of the continuation of the iron, of the previous world empire, the Roman Empire. They are mixed in to this scenario, okay? Well, let's think about that. The continuation of the Roman Empire is the religious aspect, the religious manifestation. So this additive, this clay additive, that's apparently not a human component because they're mixing themselves with the seed of men. So there's your distinction. This is not the seed of men. They're mixing themselves with the seed of men. Particularly, they are mixing themselves with the religious continuation of the Roman Empire. And this is the part that slips by a lot of people. So, what am I saying? What is this implying? First of all, let me say that at the end of the day, this entire statue at the end of the vision is demolished by a stone that comes down, and it demolishes the statue. It annihilates this final empire, and from this stone, it grows into a great mountain. That is the kingdom of the Lord Jesus Christ. So that's the end of the vision. I mean, that's what happens at the end. So no matter who they are, they're going to be annihilated. Their empire will be annihilated. But it's interesting to note that you have the two legs that are perfectly describing the two Roman empires, west and east, and then you have the feet, which the feet have 10 toes. There are 10 toes on the feet, and suddenly we have these 10 kings in the book of Revelation. And we have to now start thinking about these 10 kings and the unfolding of the prophetic scenario in the book of Revelation as not entirely human, because there is a they component that is mingling with the seed of men. And if you look into and we were talking about the occult, the phenomenon of the accelerated of the public acceleration of the occult in the United States and in the Western world. One of the primary objectives of the occult, of the mystery schools worldwide, without a doubt, and you can read Manly P. Hall. All you have to do is read Manly P. Hall, and you're going to find this out immediately, is the resurrection and the restoration of the Atlantean Empire, of the Atlantean paradigm, which is to say, the resurrection of the Golden Age, the time when the gods were among men and were mingling themselves with the seed of men. So what we see in Daniel's statue is a resurgence of the Atlantean paradigm, and it goes further. Atlantis had 10 kings. I believe that there was a city of Atlantis, or a city reminiscent of Atlantis in the pre-flood world, but I also believe that Atlantis is an analogy of the antediluvian world and the antediluvian paradigm in general, because it was Poseidon, according to Greek myth, who took a human wife and gave birth to 5 sets of twins who ruled over not only over the island of Atlantis, but the empire of Atlantis that was a global empire. So the occult is working towards the resurrection of the golden age, of the time when the gods mingled themselves with the seed of men. Enter the UFO phenomenon, enter the alien abductions, enter this entire ufological situation. And I believe it's absolutely correlates with the idea of the resurrection of the golden age. That's why the occult is accelerating all of this and is being used as a mouthpiece and as a vehicle through which these entities are beginning to rebuild the empire that was lost in the judgment of God beneath the waves of the great flood. It is going to resurge in the earth. And I go into much more detail in my presentation. I think there's some very surprising and shocking information in my presentation that I'm not going to divulge here, but that will be a part of my presentation in Branson. So what we have is, getting back to the Church of Rome, the spiritual manifestation. And by the way, let me just say this, and I know Steve can attest to this. There's a lot of people talking about a lot of things out there now on the internet, in the world of YouTube. Everything from Mandela effect to flat earth, everything in between. But there are very few subjects that are going to get people kicked off of YouTube or in a situation where there's an attempted murder. And the subject that I'm about to talk about is one of those subjects. This is not just some kind of a light thing that we kick around haphazardly. This is very serious. And we are right now in the process, Steve and I are in the process of putting together the expedition for episode 4 of our True Legend series. And I'm not going to go any further than that. We're not going to divulge where we're going or what we're doing because it's highly sensitive. But we're actively working on this. And the information that we're getting from certain parts of the earth that are not areas that we've gone into thus far in our series are absolutely confirming and underlining and highlighting what we've been saying all along. It's amazing. Steve approached me some months ago and said, I feel like we need to go here. And I didn't really know what was going on in this area of the world that Steve was pointing to. But I found out later on, my God, this is a amalgamation of everything we've been talking about, and it takes it to the next level. So, and it has to do with a lot of different things that we've dealt with in our films. But so back to this manifestation of this religious empire and they that's mingling themselves with it, specifically with this empire, the continuation of the iron in the legs. It is the religious world system under the dominion of the Church of Rome and the Orthodox Church. This isn't to pick on Catholics, as Steve always says, and as I'm reiterating. It has nothing to do with Catholics. It has to do with a hierarchy that has, as I use this term concerning the U.S. government's activity with non-human entities, has made a Faustian bargain with non-human demonic entities. And it appears now, that the great threat to the world in terms of religious threat is Islam. And indeed, Islam is a great threat and a terrible threat. But we're coming to something that's an even greater threat, and it is the formulation of a world religion. And the formulation of the world religion is going to be based around a very strong delusion, and the people who are in the background already formulating this world religion are actively in contact with non-human entities, and that information is coming to us and is being confirmed by multiple sources. So this is a very intense subject matter because it really gets to the heart of what's going on. We will witness a resurgence of the empire of the gods from the antediluvian age, from the Atlantean empire. That dynamic, that paradigm will resurge in the earth at the end of the age, and it's going to fundamentally consist of several different dynamics that we talk about over and over and over. One of those dynamics is the UFO stuff, because they are mingling themselves with the seed of men, and I believe there's a distinct reason why they're mingling themselves with the seed of men, and it's part of the reason is what I tried to elucidate, perhaps not very effectively, the last time I was on your show, and that is that the human race is running out of time, genetically speaking. Our genetic clock is ticking. It's ticking to midnight. We're running out of time. And we're coming into a very apocalyptic scenario for the human race, regardless of whatever geopolitical situations unfold on the earth. There is an even more urgent crisis unfolding in the genome of the human being, and it is inevitable, and it is coming. And so it's going to precipitate a host of different, the falling, let's say, of a host of dominoes that are going to begin to collapse right in front of us. And I don't know when it's going to happen, but it's coming. So there is a resurgence of the antediluvian empire from the world before the flood of Noah that is already beginning. The pieces are beginning to come together. They are mingling themselves with the seed of men. And that final world empire is going to grow up out of the ruins, the religious manifestation, the ruins of the Roman Empire. The word ruins isn't the continuation of the Roman Empire, the legs of iron, which are now in a religious manifestation in the Church of Rome and in the Orthodox Church. And people may say, well, the Church of Rome, the Orthodox Church, and I see this online all the time. Why do they like to pick on them? And they're basically irrelevant now. Now it's all about Islam. Now it's all about postmodernism and secularism and atheism. No, I beg to differ. I think that what's percolating in the background, behind the curtains, over in Vatican City is much more of a threat, much more dynamic, much more important than anything that we're seeing on the geopolitical stage yet, or currently, I should say. So these are very. This is something that I think is overlooked in terms of this continuation of Rome, the iron mixed with clay, the religious continuation of the Empire of Rome, and the admixture of these non-human entities, the they that are already beginning to mingle themselves with the seed of men. And so that's why it is important to have a realistic, a pragmatic, and a rational view of ufology, UFOs, aliens, and everything that we're dealing with here. Because, in a sense, what I feel like we are doing by talking about this information, by focusing on this kind of information and reiterating it over and over, because I was praying about this the other day, what good is it really doing? Are we really having an impact? And what I felt in my spirit was the Lord telling me that what we're doing is we're creating a vanguard, that we're creating an informational vanguard, if you will, that we are going before the people and pulling the curtains back before the official disclosure moment, when it will be a shock and awe situation, even though we are already gradually being acclimated to these ideas, the ideas of extraterrestrial life and so forth, as I talked about before. So I feel like this is creating a vanguard. This is putting the information out there in advance, giving people time to understand it, giving people time to modify their paradigms that need modification, to mature in the Lord, to mature in the way that we process information, and to become advanced in our thinking and ready for the advanced assault that is, again, percolating in the background. And I don't think it is a coincidence that there are all of these red herrings being thrown into the mix on the internet, on YouTube, and in other places. And I think a lot of you know what red herrings I'm referring to, that are causing people to go down all of these different trails and breaking up what was, I would say that what was about 5 years ago, a solid front, pressing forward into the idea of a secret space program, into the idea of the ufological stuff, into the idea of the ruling elite and the Luciferian plans that are being concocted in secret. I think that there was a more unified push, and so there was some psyops launched to break up that community. You can call them the Christian truther community, whatever you want to call it. And so we're seeing already an offensive that has been launched against us, and it is having, unfortunately, a real effect. And so I'm going to kick it back to you guys. As I said, I feel like what's been happening as a vanguard is being prepared.
Yes.
Is moving forward and has been coming together for some time. And so the objective was to break it up.
Right. Break
it up because there's too much quality information coming forth. The pieces are coming together. So it's like, it's like slamming a cue ball into the rack and breaking the balls apart so that they go in their different directions and go down different rabbit holes. So, and I would say, and I think people know what I'm talking about, although this will be very controversial to a lot of people listening, but I don't really care at this point. I really do believe that the flat Earth thing is a psyop, and I know that Steve wholeheartedly agrees with me, and that there's a lot of there's a lot of other things out there that are psyops that are being purposely interjected into the mix in order to create discord and break up that vanguard of information, because I think people were getting very close to some things, especially as they pertain to the secret space program and to everything involved in what we've been talking about tonight.
Okay.
And by the way, Doug, I'm not aware of anybody that has lost their life or has had an attempt on their life because they're exposing the flat Earth. And yet we can name multiple individuals who have been murdered for exposing the alien question and the government's interaction with aliens and underground bases, and for talking about the Church of Rome and their involvement in all of this.
Well, in Branson, I'm going to be presenting the Mars-Earth Wars. And like I said, because it's so wonderfully beautiful. Here's what I'm telling you, that Mars and Earth were so much alike. We're within 98.2%, pretty plus or minus the tenth or 0.2% of spin axis of Mars and its rotational speed, and also, its tilt on its axis. I believe in astrocatastrophism. That means that one of the things that is really pertinent in the Old Testament is God said, though you exalt yourself amongst the stars, yet will I bring you down. And that is a pretty prominent statement. I believe the fallen angels that were on earth, that were aware of the flood and aware of the judgment on their children, the giants, many of them fled off planet. Now, the question is, were certain groups of them, did they have their wings clipped? Did they lose their supernatural ability to transcend dimensions or time and space when they committed the horrible acts they committed, to which the book of Enoch addresses and also the book of Giants? And by the way, people, you can go on I have another website, I never talk about it enough, I guess, Genesis, 6giants.com. Genesis, 6giants.com, and look at the ancient text up on the nav bar. But the gist of it is we're seeing right now the interest in Mars, and Mars had an elliptical orbit. And I can quote enough philosophers, enough historians, enough primal witnesses who wrote it down that while one thing was happening on one side of the world, the other side of the world was witnessing even volcanoes on Mars, Olympus Mons. When you have a thing called Roche's limit, that the greater, if you will, density and gravity of a heavenly body can not only influence, it can destroy. Prior to the destruction, there's a plasma discharge. It's my contention that the Valle Marineris, if you will, the equivalent of the Grand Canyon on Mars, which is 2,500 miles long and I think 5 miles deep, an arc, if you will, a plasma discharge between Mars and Earth is what created the Grand Canyon. I categorically reject that it was just a hydrological event because of the location. In other words, you take the axis point of the Earth at that time, and I'm talking 700 years BC. That was the last what was called Mars flyby. In order to disturb a planet out of its orbit, you must have a gravitational effect, a gravitational influence, whether they call it Planet X, Nibiru, whatever. The point is, something happened, and God brought his judgment on Rahab. Now, it's fascinating. Just as we have twins in the Scripture, obviously you have Cain and Abel. Obviously, you have the situation of Jacob and Esau. The point being is that one's good, one's evil. There's a reason why the ancients were terrified of astrocatastrophism. Velikovsky had part of it right, but they mocked him. Just the if you will, the uniformitarian people and the evolutionists just mocked Velikovsky. He was a genius. You talk about somebody that understood orbital physics, and even Tesla understood orbital physics. And by the way, orbital means circular. The gravity has to be equal on all pressure points of the Earth. And so as Mars came by, nobody's recording in ancient history, yeah, I saw a triangle or a parallelogram. No, it's crazy. And the thing is that now we're seeing, if you go to a subatomic level, photons, all of the subatomic particles, muons, gluons, and every other ons that are out there and still to be found and named, there is a reason why things are circular. Pi, the universal constant. Everything that is a universal constant mathematically centers around pi. Even the occultists know that. And the thing that's interesting to me is mathematics. And by the way, I'm the last guy to talk about advanced mathematics. I can understand the concept, but, hey, the way I used to balance my checkbook, you'll appreciate this, Tim and Doug, I used to just open a bank account when I figured I was close to running out of money, I'd open another one. And I'm not exaggerating that. The point being is that when you're dealing with quantum physics, when you're dealing with quantum mechanics, when you're dealing with orbital physics, and this is what I find interesting, when you're dealing with geoglyphs that the late David Flynn brought out in excellence in Cydonia, The Secret Chronicle of Mars, which, by the way, I brought that back into print. I wrote about, 42, 44-page introduction. And when NASA, never a straight answer, was glibly or smart-aleckly saying, the Martian Morse code, I'm going to deal with that. We have a brother, I won't name him, and thank you, you know who I'm talking about, that was on our trip with us, who was kind enough to match up the Martian geoglyphs with the the Martian Morse code, which they called sand dunes. Well, how is it that those sand dunes match the geoglyphs on the Altiplano in Bolivia? What David Flynn said, there was a language. Doug, I put out a request on your show, and I had two guys who were, by their own confession, pretty bright guys, but they just couldn't grasp how to decipher this. Now, you may need a supercomputer, and it may be in God's time. It is my contention that NASA knows exactly what the language of the ancients is. It's inscribed in the earth. And by the way, Jesus said if the people didn't cry Hosanna, even the rocks would cry out. I'm telling you point blank, the rocks are going to cry out. They're going to give up their secrets because, again, the Martian Morse code, and I coined a new term called the Marzetta Stone, similar to the Rosetta Stone. You couldn't have understood hieroglyphics had it not been for the Rosetta Stone that basically had a if you will, cursive form of hieroglyphics translated into Greek, and therefore that's how we learned how to read Egyptian hieroglyphics, the Rosetta Stone. So when I put out there that I'm looking for someone to do this, what I wanted them to do was three-dimensionally basically take the geoglyphs of Bolivia, and then I wanted to three-dimensionally model the, if you will, sand dunes on Mars. Now, this is beyond my capability. I mean, I'm a move-the-mouse guy. Thank God that Tim's got the talents he's got in computers and that he's young and knows all this stuff. But what we've come up with is a parallel, if you will, language. And it's binary, but what's interesting to me, it also bears kind of semblance to Ogam, O-G-A-M. It basically bears witness to some of the early Phoenician script. And so here's what I want people to understand. When we're talking about fallen angels they beheld the wonders and the mysteries of God before they fell. They choose to rebel. They choose to insert themselves, as the book of Jude says, and have impure relations with earth women. Now, look, the sons of Seth, they were the equivalent of the size of their countryman. And the thing that's interesting to me is everything after its kind. David wasn't fighting Goliath because Goliath was a son of Seth. The giants hated God. Tim basically found a recitation on a pillar, and it came as a shock to everybody. But the giants said before, or on their way to Sardinia, that they were fleeing from Joshua the usurper. And it seems like basically Sardinia was the island in which, the giants decided where they're going to head to the rest of the world. But I want to share this. The advanced mathematics of the universe was shown to Enoch. The secret occult societies have supposedly the emerald tablets of Thoth. T-O-T-H. They supposedly have a second or a third depository of the library that was at Alexandria, Virginia, that was destroyed. So all this hidden knowledge, and the word hidden, occult knowledge, is so that they, at the time of their choosing, the Luciferian fallen angel, global galactic conspiracy, it can basically deceive mankind with the ultimate end game of destroying the very last human being. And Jesus said, if the days weren't short, there'd be no flesh left alive. That really couldn't even be embraced 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Maybe with the advent of the atom bomb, the whole world would blow up, everybody would die of radiation poisoning, it'd be over. But now you see it coming at us from all ways, all directions. You're seeing euthanasia, where countries now, Iceland is killing any child with Down syndrome, and they're being applauded. We're seeing the abortion industry, but it goes beyond the abortion. It's gone into the religion of the Canaanites, eating the children, And what I guess my pet peeve, Doug, and this is a pet peeve, we can talk about this stuff, but it's important for the people of God, those redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, who've asked Jesus Christ to come into their life and be their personal Lord and Saviors, who have repented repented from their sin, who are looking to Jesus to realize that it is your responsibility, and God gives you the authority to stand against the evil. Yet I can only share this, and I know that Tim and I talk about this all the time out at our studio. What has become of Christendom claimants that are absolutely terrified of everything, and they'll spend more time bashing us than they will of standing up for Jesus. Now, whether they are known of the Lord or not, they claim to know him. And as I shared one time on your show, very powerful revelation, and I took it to heart. It's not so much that I say, I know Jesus. Will Jesus say, welcome? Or will he say, depart from me, ye who work lawlessness, I never knew you. So as this whole metaphysical, and I talk about metaphysical, a better word would be supranatural, above the nature. I want to read a couple things because I know we're going fast out of time. From Whitley Strieber, who I have interviewed a couple times. I think he interviewed me once, years and years ago. He wrote the book Communion about an abductee. As an abductee, it took the world by storm. He said, increasingly I felt as if I were entering a struggle that might even be more than life and death. It might be a struggle for my soul, my essence, or whatever part of me might have reference to the eternal. There are worse things than death, I suspect. So far, the word demon had never been spoken among the scientists and doctors who were working with me. Alone at night, I worried about the legendary cunning of demons. At the very least, I was going stark raving mad. I felt an indescribable sense of menace. It was hell on earth to be there in the presence of the entities, and yet I couldn't move, couldn't cry out, couldn't get away. I'd lay as still as death, suffering inner agonies. Whatever was there seemed so monstrously ugly, so filthy and dark and sinister. Of course they were demons. They had to be, and they were here, and I couldn't get away. That's why, listen, he said they're so filthy and dark, Jesus called them unclean spirits. And he said when the demons are cast out of people, Jesus speaking, they go and they walk in dark, dry places. Now, it's interesting to me that the giants and the, if you will, when the giants were killed, in other words, the hybrid half-human, half-fallen angel spirit that was set free when Goliath was murdered, that's out there someplace. So imagine this. Imagine the Illuminati. When I said this 20 years ago, I don't know if you listened to me then, Tim, probably not. But the point being, as I said, imagine the most evil group of people looking for the most evil DNA that's out there, tombs of whatever. And I use Gilgamesh as a illustration then. And imagine them wanting to bring back the bodies to, if you will, genetically reproduce them so that the evil spirits that the book of Enoch and the book of Giants both talk about have a homecoming, if you will. It will be worse than we're back, when whatever story that was. But the point is that we're seeing right now the desire for men to be as gods. And I'm telling you this, Branson is going to be probably one of the most I would say revelatory and striking conferences, not because there aren't other people out there doing good works, but the focus of ours is to give people the understanding of the root of evil, the fruit of evil, and God bless the Lord, and the victory over evil. We'll have Henry Gruver there speaking, and I don't know anybody who walks in a more supernatural world than he does. I just don't know of any. If there are, I don't know of any. And then David Langford preparing the people of God. Even the man that was giving me a hard time about how dare we not have enough seats. Look, we got the biggest venue that was available in Branson, and he had all this time, yet he was busting my because, we should have known that. Well, we warned everybody, Doug, so we're just telling you this. Live streaming, you buy it in batches of time. So that's filling up fast. And I think people thought that we were just trying to pitch it to fill it. Not at all. The point is that I believe in the law of impartation. I believe that the people that come there will get a blessing, but I believe the people that live stream it will share the same blessing. I believe the people that get it on video will share the same blessing. And the video will contain, I've got two video presentations I'll be giving, and they're both linked up to my topic. And I've got I've got 44 years of research to cover in 90 minutes. And for all of you out there, I am trying my best, and Tim is helping me to be as linear as I can. I will have my notes, I'll know what my screen images are, and I have 30 minutes to cover the pre-Adamic the angelic civilizations, the Egyptians and their effect on history as recorded by even Solon when he was talking to the priests of Sais. And basically what the priests of Sais said to Solon, that obviously Plato was privy to, is he said, when it comes to matters of understanding ancient history and catastrophism, you Greeks are but children. There have always been catastrophes and always will be. What are we looking at right now? We're looking at a global concern for, number one, the eclipse. And by the way, I think that people had better understand that. I see it crossing the United States. Look at how it's dividing this country, just as a country is being divided racially, politically, spiritually, morally, physically, and I don't know when the great quakes come, but they're coming, and every other way. So the United States is now in the, if you will, the eclipse of its greatness. And I want to share this. Everything we're teaching, talking about, our prime directive. Tim gave his declaration of faith. I've given mine many times. It is the Word of God, the first chapter of Genesis into the third chapter of Genesis, that absolutely propelled me into the quest for truth, because something happened in the book of Genesis that basically, when God judged a pre-Adamic world, people say, well, I don't believe in that. Then pray about it, and you might come to the realization that when God says replenish the earth, contrary to all the arguments against it, it literally means cause that which was to come forth again. But it was with an exchange made basically that the pre-Adamic world was wiped out, and then the Adamic world was wiped out again. There's two floods. There's Jeremiah's flood and Noah's flood. I'm going to be differentiating this. So between all of the speakers, Derek Gilbert talking about inception, Dr. Michael Lake talking about the Shinar Directive, L.A. Marzulli talking about the aliens and the stuff he's going to be dealing with, and then Anselm P. Rambla explaining the absolute, if you will, archaeoastronomical perfection of Peru, especially Cusco and the different areas that Sacsayhuaman, and all of the area that the heavens line up with. I mean, this is supernatural mathematics. So we want to invite everybody to absolutely live stream this. Now, those of you who are getting the videos, my video presentations will be incorporated in that. And I can tell you this, I think you'll be blown away, because there's going to be some answers to a lot of questions. I categorically reject uniformitarianism. I reject it totally. I believe in catastrophism. I believe that God made it very clear that he is who he is, and he can use whatever he desires, and that the ancients were terrified of the heavens for good reason. And with all the people, look, I'm in Bozeman, Montana. Tim's in Bozeman. We're maybe, 3-4 hours away from Jackson Hole. Do you know that people are coming from all over the world to Jackson Hole to take ski lift rides up to the top of the mountains? They've got a couple ski areas there, and basically to see 7 minutes worth of the eclipse, 8 seconds of totality, and there's going to be tens of millions of people, if not more, on the road going to high points, even in Bozeman. Even in Bozeman, all helicopters are rented, and some of these things rent. My friend, good night, Mark Taylor, he said all of the helicopters are rented, and people are spending huge amounts of money to spend, 7.5 minutes watching an eclipse. So I think it's important that people understand this, that just as the ancients were terrified, and eclipses always signal judgment, we are now in the same time period, because the internet is abuzz with the eclipses, the planetary alignments, and all of the situations. And one of the things that people don't understand, if in the book of Job, the oldest book in the Bible, God, in contending with Job, asked Job if he can answer or even comment on the gentle influence of Pleiades, the seven sisters. Ladies and gentlemen, it's fascinating that all of the astronomically heavenly bodies is so uniquely, wonderfully placed. If you want to know, go look up Bode's Law. The planet that should have been between Mars and Jupiter doesn't exist. It exists as the asteroid belt. So something happened, and so cataclysm is the order of the day. I maintain that people who are used to apathy and indifference are going to have to be confronted with some of the most horrific stuff, and because they wouldn't take responsibility in their faith, claiming to be Christians, to share the gospel, the good news that Jesus said, "Behold, I give you power to tread on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt you." This is why we are so passionate about what we do. Go ahead, Tim. You can finish it out. Take it off.
Well, I think, needless to say, suffice it to say, this conference is going to be a paradigm buster. And I can say that confidently because I know I've been watching Steve put his presentation together. I've been putting my presentation together. I've been in communication with Anselm and with L.A. Marsuli and some of the other people who are going to be at the conference. And we're definitely in a very interesting period of time. And some of the most astounding things that are going to unfold on the earth have yet to unfold, but are getting ready to unfold. And that's why I believe we're doing this. As I said before, I'll say it again. What we're doing is we're forming a vanguard to prepare people for the onslaught that's coming. And this is something that is, we may be entering in, I believe we are entering into the period of time that the Bible addresses more than any other period of time, the end of the age. And so I'm just, it's amazing to be alive during this period of time, to watch all of these things come together. And I mean, we're looking at sort of the macro scale of all of this, and then even when you look at the micro scale, which I would consider to be the geopolitical situations that are unfolding on the earth, just the rebellion and the lawlessness that you're seeing break out all over the earth in the United States. We are certainly living in a very dynamic time. So I also encourage people, if this information is new to you, I encourage you to watch our series, our documentary film series. That's why we made it, because we started at the beginning and we talk about the technology of the fallen. We talk about the unholy sea, what we call the unholy sea, and we talk about the Holocaust of giants. And basically everything that we've talked about tonight is interwoven through those films. And so if this is new to you, I suggest that you go and you take a look at our films. They're available on TrueLegendsTheSeries.com. They're in CD, they're in a DVD, Blu-ray, and streaming format. So you can stream them on Vimeo. It's unlimited streaming. And again, I would encourage you to go reference those films if this content is new to you. I'm assuming, though, that most of the audience listening to us and that will be listening to us in the rebroadcast on YouTube and iTunes and what else are very familiar with this topic matter. So we have these films out there. We have the conference coming, and we have another expedition, another film in the works. So we're very busy here at Gen 6 Productions. And I just want to thank you guys, Doug and Joe, for having us on again. And I'm going to turn it back over to you.
The fact that Atlantis will rise again, that was the theme of the mystery schools. That is the theme of all that is going on behind the scenes. Tim quoted Manly P. Hall, Blavatsky, all of the, if you will, the hellish excitement is building to this point. And one of the interesting things is there was a prophecy by the Cumaean Sibyl, and this is interesting because it reveals that the Antichrist would be opposed by two witnesses from the book of Revelation identified with Elijah and Enoch, after having killed the witnesses and started a final persecution of the Christians. But then it goes on to say the Antichrist will be slain by the power of God through Michael the Archangel on the Mount of Olives. Well, I don't know about this, but what I will tell you is this. There's also an attribution to the Cumaean Sibyl, meaning a prophetess, that the old gods would fade away, but then at the end of the age they would come back, in full force and full fury. So I would say to every Christian out there worldwide, because we get people from all over the world listening to your broadcast, that be of good courage. Jesus said, I've conquered the world. And he will give you the power, the knowledge, and the understanding to be able to cope with this stuff. And my fight as a talk radio host, and I guess now as a guest on a lot of different shows, is that people will understand that Tim's word Vanguard, by the way, is one of the names of the first missiles too. It actually means also to stand guard and to hold back, but it was associated with a missile. In the Bible, one last thought, parting. I believe God, when he says his angels are ministering spirits of fire, I believe that God, in his wisdom, when he created all the angels and called them into being, I believe those were that's what they're created out of. I don't know how God did it. Just as we're created out of the earth. So I believe that passage in Daniel, as Tim has rightly defined, the mixing the clay and the iron, refers exactly to that the idea of this, the angelic hosts, the ones that kept not their first estate, that took on corporeal bodies. In other words, they could eat, they could do whatever they could do in the form of a man. I believe those entities in an evil form are the true rulers of the world behind the scenes, pulling the puppet strings of everybody that's pretty much, with few exceptions, everybody that's on the political scene and the religious scene that is empowered by money, corruption, greed, and lust. I believe the fallen angels have played humanity, and they're yet to have their final stage appearance, and that is on the earth now. It is already happening. Pray for President Trump. Pray that the evil that surrounds him, including those who he considers trusted advisors or even family members or in-laws, pray that God expose that. Pray, brothers and sisters, for him. Pray that God gives him a dream and shows him who is for him and who's against him, and that God himself remove those who wish him harm.